Welcome. My name is Wiley. I work with Brilliant Labs. And what we're doing today is a session on Scratch. Scratch allows us to program animation, stories, and so on using something called block-based coding. It's lots of fun. You'll notice that we've actually now already opened up our browser to scratch.mit.edu. At this point, we can actually begin to do some of our programming and get ready. We could sign in and create an account here. Today, we're just going to click on the Create button and begin our work. Before I go any further, though, we need to be made aware that we have another program created by the same people at MIT called Scratch Junior, which is available for an iPad. And this is a wonderful tool for working with younger children in particular. It does introduce some of the concepts that we would use in Scratch, but Scratch Junior is a little easier to work with, and as such, it's much easier to get started with younger kids. Again, I would suggest you probably take a look at this and download the app to your Android or your iOS device, and I think you'll find it a really useful program to get your students or younger children involved in coding. All right, let's get started. At this point, we're going to get ready to create. We're not going to sign in today. We're going to go straight to the Create button. You could create an account. If you're a teacher, you could create a teacher account to manage some of your student work. But today, we're just going to create. Okay, now that we've clicked the Create button, we're going to wait for it to load. When it loads first, this screen pops up, which is basically a tutorial screen. We're not going to use those today. We're going to actually just go straight into coding, but it's a nice idea if you take some time to work with those tutorials. They are very well done and useful. But for today, we're going to just close this window and begin our little exercise into writing a story in Scratch. Let's take some time and look around our screen. You'll notice on the right hand side we have a cat. It's called the Scratch cat, and that is the character that we're going to be manipulating today. Over on the left we have some groups of code or blocks that we can use, and in the middle is where we place most of this stuff as we work. You'll notice on the bottom there are a number of blue circular icons and a rectangular one on the left. Those are when we want to go and get extra things to place in our design, such as more characters, which are called sprites, by the way, or if we want to get sounds or backgrounds. You'll notice that the groups of code that we have on the left have been color coded for our purpose, and we have different ones such as motion, looks, sound, events, control, sensing, and so on. We're going to take a look at some of the basic ones of those today and try to get this cat to do something for us. You'll notice that we can move the cat by simply dragging him about our window, but right now we're actually going to get to move him a different way by using code. You can see here some of the different groups of code. For example, in motion one we can have move, we have looks, the sound as we were talking about, the events which trigger things to happen, our control which gives us ways of manipulating our code, and we have some sensing capabilities, some mathematics stuff we can use. The first one we're going to look at today is motion. And motion really has to do with the way our sprite, a cat in this particular case, moves about our screen. We have things such as move 10 steps, turn, point in a certain direction, and so on. The 10 steps, by the way, are actually just pixels on a screen. They're not true steps. We'll try to make it look like true steps later. So we have our first piece of code put out there, and it's move 10 steps. And if we now want the cat to move, we are going to use an event. So we can choose which event we'd like to use to make the cat go across the screen. We can do things like when a key is pressed, or when the start flag, if you like, is clicked, or even when you click on the sprite, or as I said in this case, which is the cat. And that's the one we're going to pick today. You'll notice how the code snaps together. They're like blocks, and in fact this is block-based coding, so that we can put blocks together to build lengthy piece of code. In this particular case we just have two so far. One tells us when the cat is clicked, and you can see the cat move. It will move 10 steps across the screen. If we change our mind and decide one piece of code we don't want to use anymore, we can just pull it back to the code window and it would disappear. And we can go and grab another piece of code and place it where we wanted the other one to be. So one of the easiest ways to delete code is to just drag it to the left and make it disappear. This particular piece of code here tells the cat to move to a random position on the screen. When you see this little drop down arrow in a piece of code, that means you can make choices. In this particular case, we could have random position or mouse pointer. This will vary depending on the piece of code that you have. But when you see the drop down, know that you can select other things. This particular piece of code moves to an exact position on the screen, and it has two rounded boxes, we'll call them, and we can actually type in where exactly we want it on the screen. If we want it to go to the center of the screen, it would actually be position 0 and 0 in the X and Y. Okay, we've placed the cat back, and now we're going to go back to our 10 steps, and we're going to do a little work with this one. All right, let's have a look at some other things we can do other than just looks. And one of the fun things to do is actually do sounds. When you bring a sprite in the case of the cat, in this one, a sound gets attached to it, and we can use that sound in our coding. So we have a couple of different ways we can manage this sound. One is play sound, and the other one is actually called start sound. And you notice that meow is here. The difference in play sound and start sound is start sound will start the sound and go on and run the rest of your code, while play sound will not let the rest of the code run until the sound is finished. You'll notice that you can also record. So if you have a sound enabled device, a laptop where sound is already there, or a Chromebook, you can record your own voice or your own sounds and use those in your programming as well. Today we'll just stay with the meow because I cannot use my sound since I'm using it for the recording. You can also upload your own sounds that you might have created before. If you notice here, I'm just showing you how you can manipulate the code when you move it. If you create separation between the top one and the one next to it, you can decide how you want to pull that code back out. If you pull two pieces will come out. Again, keep in mind the difference between start sound and play sound. Play sound will finish the sound before the next bit of code works. So if you had a really long piece of sound, it might kind of make your code behave differently because it didn't let you do anything until the sound finishes. So a lot of times we like to use just start sound. So at this point we have three pieces of code that make up our little animation so far. And we're going to go to another group of code and we're going to drag that out and see how this behaves. This one here is say hello for 2 seconds. Remember, you can change the word hello and the value to something you might want to put in there. So now when we click on the sprite, three things happen. He moves, sound starts, and it says hello. Again, just keep in mind you can replace anything to rounded boxes. By the way, that rounded box is called a stadium, something new I learned. So anything in the stadium can be changed to other values. Okay, let's test out our change. See if it reflects when we click on the sprite. And it does. The cat moved. There was a meow. And we'll also notice that he said "I" there for 3 seconds. You guys couldn't hear the meow in my recording. The original sound was there, but it's not this time. When you bring a sprite into your animation, along with sounds, there's also typically costumes. And a costume is another view of the sprite, maybe with its, in this particular case, with its legs in a different position. It might be, if you bring in one of the animated people, you might find dance moves, for example. In this particular case, we have two costumes. And the difference is basically the front paws and back paws of the cat, or in this case looks like arms and legs, are actually in a different position. So it makes it look like we can have the cat move. And we're going to use that to our advantage in a minute. Along with the pre-designed sprites, you can also change those. You can paint on them, you can draw on them, you can manipulate them in other ways, change their size. So there's all kinds of things you can do with your sprites to dress them up. We're going to today just use the two that are there, and you can see the slight difference we're going to be able to use this to make it look like the cat is walking across the screen. In our first attempt here, we're just going to drag out switch to costume 2 and see how that behaves. We're going to do a little bit more work with this, but we can decide where we want this. You notice I took out the sound. And if you look closely again, you'll notice that he only moved to the costume, second costume once. That might not work best for us. So we're going to make a change. And now we're using next costume. And the way next costume works, it always cycles through your costumes in order, which is a really cool way of doing it. So now when we click on the cat, you can see that the cat will be moving across the screen, switching to the next costume and saying "I" there. Again, this don't make a real lot of sense because every time that the cat moves across the screen, he's saying "hi," and this gets a little repetitive, so we're going to have to find a way to fix that. Well, to solve the problem of the cat saying "I" every time he moves, we're going to do something a little different. We're going to put some control into our animation, and the control is going to allow us to loop a piece of code. This will allow us to separate the sound, or in this case, the looks, from the other part we want to do, which is make the cat walk. While we're here in the look sections, you can see there's a whole bunch of things you can do, such as think as opposed to say, which give you a different look. You can change costume. You can have the sprite get larger, get smaller, change colors, hide it, show it. There's a number of things you can do. So far we have looked a little bit at motion, a little bit at looks, a little bit at sound. We've picked events, and now we're going to choose control. And this is the one that's going to allow us to keep the cat moving a little bit more than clicking on him every time. You'll notice here that we have things like wait, which is a pause. We have a forever loop or repeat loop. We have some if-thens, which are really powerful, we can use. And you can see now that I've put out a little pause right after he says hello. He's going to wait 1 second before he does his moves. So it just might be a little bit more pleasant to watch. Alright, this is the one we came for, which is a repeat. And you'll notice now I can take those two pieces of code and it will go right inside of that loop. Or some people like to call it like an alligator's mouth. It will fit. So right now, he's going to say "hi" there for 2 seconds. He's going to wait. And then he's going to repeat whatever's inside of that bracket 10 times. And what will happen, he's going to move 10 steps. Switch costume, move 10 steps, switch costume, and do that 10 times. You'll notice that the cat moved 10 steps, but the next costume thing made him look like he's running, which is really cool. It's a great way to do some animation. As I said before, you'll notice that the rounded box, or the stadium as we learned, has values that we can change. So right now, for example, I have him waiting a half a second, which is 0.5, and we're going to have him move 5 steps instead of 10. Oh, that didn't work. I think we should keep it at 10. It looked like he was going way too fast. That looks better. So we've covered a number of things now, like motion, looks, sound, events, and a little bit of control as well. And we've combined them together. But it'd be really cool now if we put a background here in this scene. It doesn't have anything very exciting at this point. It'd be nice if we did something. And you'll notice at the bottom of the screen where you can choose sprites, you can choose backgrounds, and so on. You can see them right here. You can also upload your own, or you can draw your own in the program as well. So we're going to look for something. I was going to see if we can find a kitchen. And looks like a kitchen is not found. So let's try room. And there we have. Let's put him in this room. So we've repositioned the cat in a more appropriate place, and we're going to continue to build our animation. So a quick review of what we have done so far. When we click the sprite, he's going to say hi there. He's going to wait a half a second, and then he's going to move 10 steps and switch next costume, but he's going to do that 10 times. And again, remember, we can move our code around and put pieces in. For example, now I'm going to change this one to when the space bar is pressed, as opposed to when I click on him. So I hit the space bar on my keyboard, and the cat will do his animation. A question was asked about sound, and we did mention earlier that sound can be created by recording. You can also upload sounds or upload sprites or backgrounds all from your computer and build them as part of your animation. We can also edit sounds that we bring in, or edit the existing sounds. And let's click on the Sounds tab, and you can see our sound window here. And this is a sound editor. We can do things like make it faster, slower, louder, softer. We can mute part of the sound. We can have it fade in, fade out, make it sound like a robot even, or put it in reverse. And again, you can't hear my sounds because of the recording, but those sounds will sound properly on your machine. The lower left-hand corner is where you can choose a sound, and you can search for them, record them, even get a surprise, or the very top icon there is to upload. And you can search for sounds in here. We're going to find a different sound for the cat if we can. Let's see what we can put in here. Oh, well, put a dog sound on a cat. That wouldn't be good. Make the cat growl. Maybe not appropriate, but we'll try it. So now we have two sounds in our animation. We have meow, and we have the growl sound. So we have two that we could work with. So back to our code, if we wanted to put this sound in, we can actually pull it and separate. You notice I took the first one that I wanted away. And we're going to change that to, what was that? So we hear a growl sound, and the cat is wondering what it might be. So now we have to go and get our sound. And you can see we have play and start. This particular case, it might be okay to use play because we want it to finish before he says anything. So that might be a good case for using play sound as opposed to start sound. You'll notice that the sound has a drop down where we can actually choose between growl and meow, but we're going to leave that one there for now, and we can actually put a second one in. So we hear a sound growl. Cat says, "What was that?" It meows, pauses, and then does its movement of 10 steps and change in costume 10 times. That's our loop that we had defined earlier. So a growl sound happened, cat moved, waited, and did its animation. You'll notice that I keep pulling the cat back into the start position that I want. We can learn other ways of doing that as well. For this lesson, we'll just keep pulling the cat back. What would be really interesting now is if we had another character in our story to make it a lot more interesting than just one. So we'll go and select a dog. Since we put a growl sound in, that might work. And I'm going to take that first dog right here. So now we have two characters. Now we can manipulate those characters in the direction they're pointed, their size, and so on. But for this exercise, we're just going to leave it the same. So we now have two characters in our story. We have a cat and a dog. And we're going to want those characters to interact with each other a little bit. So that's going to be the next thing we're going to try to do. Take note that when I'm writing code for the cat, I better have the cat selected, and the dog selected if I want to write code that applies to him. So keep that in mind, that you're actually writing code on the sprite or character that you're actually working with. In this particular case right now, the cat has all the code and the dog has none at this point, but we're going to fix that. So we're going to start with a different key just because we can. So when we press the up arrow, the dog is going to do something. And the first thing we'll have the dog do is do the dog sound, which is a bark. And again, you won't hear it on my computer, but if you're following along, you will hear it on yours. So let's go back to the dog here. And let's add some more animation to the dog besides the sound. So when we click the cat, it does what he did all along that we had programmed, but the dog is not reacting. So we need a way to make the dog react to the events in the story. Right now, when you hit the space bar, the cat does its animation. And when you hit the up arrow on your keyboard, the dog does it. But it's not really connected to each other in any kind of way. And there are ways we can do that, and we're going to be looking at them in just a moment. Again, keep in mind which sprite you're coding, because that's the one that's going to be highlighted, and you want to keep track of what code. Keep in mind also that if you delete the code on a sprite, if you delete a sprite, you will also delete the code that was attached to that sprite. So you might want to keep that in mind as well. One way that you can have interactions between characters or sprites in your story is to have them broadcast a message. You could do things like sensing as well, but today we're going to look at broadcasting, which is a really cool thing. So what we're going to do here is when the cat finishes its animation, it's going to broadcast a message that all other characters in the story can hear. This particular case, we're just going to call the message hello. So at the end of its animation, the cat is going to say hello basically in a broadcast. It's not an audible sound, but it's something that the other sprites or characters can hear and react to. So keep in mind, at the end of this particular one now, the last thing that happened is the cat broadcasts a message called hello. And now, of course, we're going to have to do something with the dog to react to this broadcast. So the dog has to have a piece of code that allows it to behave according to the broadcast. And one of the cool things about that one is this particular piece of code here. It says when I receive, and I, remember, is the dog right now. When I receive hello, it's going to do something. Well, the first thing it's going to do is play sound, but we're going to also add a little bit of looks to this one just to make it interesting. And what we're going to do now is test it out. Again, just for a quick review, the code is when we click the space bar, the cat is going to make its sound, do its animation, do a broadcast, and the dog is going to receive the broadcast, and because it received it, it's going to say hello, or in this case we're going to say hello Mr. Cat, and he's going to do that for 2 seconds. So keep in mind, what starts all of this is our click on the keyboard. When we click the space bar, the cat does his animation, and you'll notice now that the dog does its animation. So the key part to understand here is the broadcast. A broadcast is something that all characters in a scene can hear, and they can react depending on which broadcasts they want to react to. And you've recoded this one to basically say hello Mr. Cat once it receives the hello broadcast. So now our characters are actually interacting with one another, as opposed to acting independently with 2 key presses or 2 mouse presses, for example. Again, just let's do a little quick review here. If you want to choose extra sprites or edit your own sprites that you have there, you can do them in the sprite editor. You can also go and get extra sprites over on the right hand side of your screen. You can get extra backgrounds on the other side. We're going to have our story change scenes a little bit. We're going to, just like we brought in the extra sprite and we imported or opened up an extra sound, we're actually going to do an extra background. Be kind of nice to have our story change scenes a little bit. So we're going to actually choose an extra background that will complement our story. And we're going to change our story a little bit as we go, which is perfectly fine. You can upload a background, and in this particular case, I'm going to upload one that I have stored on my computer, and we can use that as our background. It's just a picture of a park that I downloaded, and you can get yours from any source, and it would be great to use ones that you created yourself. I think in this particular case, we're going to have them have a little conversation, and they're going to move outside. So I'm going to upload one that, as I said, I had downloaded, and we're going to make it a park scene. And you can see that I've uploaded it, and now I have the two characters in a park scene. Probably an appropriate place for the cat and the dog to go play. Remember, again, you can paint your own. You said you can upload them. One of the really nice things about Scratch is that you can be very creative. You don't have to use everything that Scratch provides. You don't have to use any of it, really. You can upload your own characters, draw your own characters, create your own sounds, create your own backgrounds, and do a complete fresh animation. Today, of course, we're using some built-in characters such as the Scratch cat and our dog, and we also can do sound editing here, as you can see. I could take this sound, and trim it. I could fade it in, fade it out, and there's a number of things. So if you upload your own sounds and there's a little bit of noise on the front or back of your sound, you can easily edit them out. Works very, very well. So back to our code. Remember, we have two lots of code going on here. One that's attached to the dog and one that is attached to the cat. And we're going to do some changes in this to make our story a little more interesting. One of them will be when we change the background, and we're also going to change the conversation a little bit to make it more appropriate for this scene. So again, just by way of quick review, our code is pretty much the same for the cat. It's doing exactly what we programmed at the beginning. The dog is interacting based upon the broadcasts of the cat. Well, to keep our story going, maybe what we'll do is have the dog broadcast the message as well that the cat can react to. So we'll create a new message, and it doesn't really matter what you call this here. I'm just going to call it go to park, basically, or go to the park. So when the dog finishes its animation, the last thing it does is broadcast the message. And this message, or just before it broadcasts, I think we're going to have it ask the cat a question. Would you like to go to the park? And then the last thing we wanted to do is broadcast that message. So he's going to ask a question, broadcast the message, and we're going to go back and add some extra code now to the cat. The cat can react to more than one thing, and it can react to our spacebar or whatever key we choose, or it can react to a broadcast as well. So once the cat hears the message, he's going to say that he would like to do that. That would be fun. Everything in our story is the same at this point, except right at the end of the dog's animation, he created a broadcast that we can have the cat react to. So the story has kind of gone back and forth. Cat says, "Hello, Mr. Cat, and now would you like to go to the park?" And the cat replies, "That sounds like fun." So now we've got a little bit of a story going. But in our animation here, we're probably going to have to do a little bit of work with these backgrounds, because they're not in the order that I would like them yet. You'll notice now that I said switch to room 2, which was our first one. But if you think about it, that's kind of opposite to what I want. It should go the other way. I want to go from the room to the park. So we're going to have to fix that one. Let's see how we can do that. Well, one of the easiest things to do would be to actually make sure when we start that we're in the right place. So we're going to be in the room. Switch to the room, that's to make sure. And then when we get to the end of the animation, we're going to switch to park. So let's try it out. So if everything works right now, we're going to be able to start off in a room. There's going to be a sound. The cat is going to react to it. It's going to broadcast a message to the dog. The dog is going to react. And he's going to broadcast a message back to the cat. And they're eventually going to leave the room and go to the park. And that will be what will happen at the end. It says, "Hello, Mr. Cat. Would you like to go to the park? That sounds like fun." And now we're at the park. So you can see how this animation works. Thanks for listening today. This was just a short introduction to the use of animation in Scratch. Hopefully you got something useful from it, and we'll chat soon. Bye.